The meter was already running when Corporal Dana Reyes hit the alley. She didn't know that yet. She was just cutting through the back of Sector 9, boots crunching on gravel still damp from the morning decontamination sweep, her board tucked under one arm and her helmet hanging from the strap of her sidearm holster. Off-duty. The war was 3 sectors over, technically, and Sector 9 was still classified as pacified, which meant it was the kind of place where the war could kill you in a dozen quiet ways without technically being the war. The meter was set into the wall of an old transit hub, flush with the ferrocrete, like it had always been there. It looked like a parking regulator from the old municipal days, the kind they used to bolt to curbs before the occupation. Brushed alloy casing, a single circular dial on its face, segmented into arcs like the chambers of a revolver. A readout above it that was dark, until she skated past it. She heard it before she saw it, a low, resonant click, like a knuckle cracking deep inside the wall. Then the dial lit up. Orange. The color of cooling slag. The color of the warning lights on an ammunition transport right before it went critical. Numbers cascaded across the readout. Not a countdown yet, not quite, more like a calibration. Like something waking up and taking measure. Reyes stopped. She turned. She looked at it. The readout stabilized. 3 minutes. The alley folded. She would try to explain it later, to the debrief officer, who sat across from her with a stylus and a professionally neutral expression. Tried to describe how the corners of the alley had simply ceased to meet at right angles. How the sky above had taken on a different quality of darkness. Not night dark, but depth dark. The dark of something that went down rather than up. How the walls had stretched, or maybe she had shrunk. No, stretched, she was certain, because she could feel the geometry pulling on her inner ear, the same sensation as a hard atmospheric drop, the body's deep confusion about which way was falling. The debrief officer did not write any of that down. What he did write down was this. Corporal Reyes was recovered from Sector 9 at 034 hours with multiple contusions, a fractured left radius, 11 confirmed alien kills, and 0 remaining rounds. The arena, whatever it was, had vanished by the time the recovery team arrived. The meter was gone. The alley was just an alley again, wet gravel and a smell like copper and old smoke. What the debrief report did not capture, could not, in the flat bureaucratic language of incident documentation, was the 2 hours and 43 minutes between the alley folding and Reyes walking back out of it. This is what those 2 hours and 43 minutes actually looked like. The first thing she understood after the fold was the space. It wasn't large, maybe 40 meters from end to end. A rough rectangle of dark floor and darker walls lit from no visible source in the gray amber wash of something approximating firelight. The floor was smooth. Not ferrocrete, not metal, something between the two, a surface that had a faint give to it, the way competition-grade timber flexes under a load. Her board, when she set it down out of reflex, rolled 3 precise meters, and stopped as if the floor itself had decided it could go no further. The walls did something that took her eyes a full 30 seconds to process. On the left, at the far end, there was an opening, a low rectangular gap in the wall, 2 meters wide, 1.5 meters high. On the right, at the near end, she had to turn and look. There was an identical opening. She walked to the right side opening and looked through it. She was looking at the space she was standing in. Same floor, same walls, same gray amber wash of sourceless light. She walked through the right opening and came out of the left opening. Walked back through the right, out of the left, standing in an identical position each time. Not mirrors, she checked. She moved her hand in a pattern, watched the exit point. Confirmed the motion arrived through the far opening with a half-second delay. A loop. Not a reflection, but an actual topological loop. 2 ends of the same space connected, so that walking out of one edge brought you in through the other. It was, she realized, a very clever kind of cage. The readout was on the wall, same meter, same dial, same orange glow, still showing 3 minutes, not counting yet, waiting for something. Then the first obstacle dropped from the ceiling. She would later describe it to her squadmates as a floating brick, which was not accurate, but was the fastest way to convey the essential fact that a dense rectangular object had descended from a point in the ceiling she hadn't noticed was open, was now hovering at approximately hip height, and was moving toward her at a speed that gave her about 4 seconds to decide what to do. She grabbed her board and jumped it, not elegantly. She was in boots, not skates, and her board was a battered military surplus model she'd been riding. Since before the occupation, the grip tape worn smooth in 2 specific spots where her feet always landed. The jump was clumsy, more of a scramble than a trick. But she cleared the obstacle, the board clattered down on the far side, and the timer started. 2 minutes, 58 seconds. The readout had a second function she hadn't noticed. A small segmented display in the lower left corner. It showed a number, 3. She stared at it for a moment, then a second obstacle dropped, and she stopped staring. The number 3 meant lives. The Varrock had been running assessment arenas for longer than humanity had been building cities. The concept was simple, elegant, and had proven accurate across 412 documented species. Every sufficiently complex biological entity, when faced with a survival scenario, would reveal its true cognitive and physical ceiling within 3 minutes of engagement. The arena stripped away tools, social structures, technological assistance, everything that civilization uses to multiply individual capability, and exposed what the organism actually was at the base level before the upgrades. The data was useful. Occupation of a new world was resource-intensive. Understanding the actual threat level of the native species, stripped of their weapons and their coordination, allowed the Varrock to calibrate exactly how much force was required. Too much force wasted energy. Too little created complications. The arenas gave precise numbers. 412 species. None had lasted more than 40 seconds in a Tier 3 assessment. The Varrock who monitored the Reyes arena was designated, in the nearest translatable approximation, as an observer of the 7th rank. She had run 11,000 assessments across her operational lifespan. She had seen every possible configuration of panic, of frozen incomprehension, of desperate flailing. She had seen species that tried to fight the obstacles, and species that tried to hide from them, and species that simply laid down in apparent acceptance of termination. She had cataloged the full range of biological surrender. She had never seen what Reyes did in the first 30 seconds. The human did not fight the obstacle and did not hide from it. She jumped it. This was not in itself remarkable. Bipedal jump responses were common. What was remarkable was the object under the human's feet when she jumped. A flat board, not a weapon, not a tool in any configuration the observer had previously encountered. A flat board on a smooth floor, which the human had used not to extend reach or to throw, but to change her own relationship to the ground itself. The observer filed a notation. Subject demonstrates non-standard spatial adaptation. Continue assessment. The meter kept running. By the 40-second mark, Reyes had lost her first life. The second obstacle had been manageable. Another floating rectangle, this one at chest height, and she ducked under it with a half-second to spare. The third had come from the side wall, a horizontal bar that swept across the full width of the space at knee level, and she jumped that too. And for a brief irrational moment she'd thought, I'm going to be fine, I've got this. This is just an obstacle course. Then the fourth and fifth came simultaneously, one high and one low, and she had approximately 1.3 seconds to choose. She chose wrong. There was no pain. That was the strangest part. The obstacle hit her at thigh level, and she felt the impact and then felt nothing, and the world stuttered. A brief visual discontinuity like a corrupted frame in a video feed. And then she was standing in the same spot, at the same position, with 2 lives remaining, and the timer reset to 3 minutes. She stood there for exactly 4 seconds, processing this. Then she picked up her board and started again. The second life lasted 1 minute and 12 seconds. She lost it to an obstacle she saw coming and misjudged anyway, an overconfident read on the speed differential that put her board 6 inches short of the landing. Reset. 2 minutes 58 seconds. 1 life remaining. She did not panic. She had been in enough firefights to know that panic is what happens in the first 3 seconds of surprise. And after that, you're either operating or you're dead, and the dead ones are the ones who kept panicking. She was not going to be a dead one. She sat down on the floor of the arena. She actually sat down, cross-legged board in her lap, and thought. 3 things she knew. 1. The space was a loop. What went out one end came in the other. This meant the obstacles that executed through the right wall were going to re-enter through the left wall. She hadn't confirmed this yet, but the geometry demanded it. 2. The obstacles ran on a pattern. She was certain of this. In the first life, she'd been too reactive to map it. In the second life, she'd caught the edge of a rhythm. 2 and 2, a pause, then 3, but lost it when she died. In this life, she needed to slow down enough to read the pattern before she committed to the sprint. 3. The board changed what she could do with her feet. Every other organism that had been placed in an arena like this one, she didn't know this, couldn't know this, but she intuited it in the way that soldiers sometimes intuit the shape of a space they've never been in. Every other organism had responded with its baseline locomotion. Walk, run, crawl, swim, fly. Reyes had a seventh option. She could ride. Riding changed the equation in two ways: speed and precision. A human on foot could clear obstacles, but the timing margins were thin. A human on a board moved faster with less metabolic cost, which meant she could react later and still make the jump. And this was the part that was starting to feel important. A board gave her a platform, a thing she could place deliberately in the space between obstacles. Not just a way to move, but a way to occupy space. She stood up. She put the board on the floor. She looked at the exit opening on the right wall, then the entry opening on the left wall, and she waited. The first obstacle of the final life came through the entry opening 40 seconds into her meditation. It was a rectangle she had seen before. Obstacle 2 from the first life, same dimensions, same height, same speed. It had looped. The arena was feeding the same set of obstacles through the same loop on a fixed cycle. Every obstacle that exited through the right wall would reappear through the left wall, approximately 40 seconds later. She had 3 minutes. She had a fixed obstacle pattern on a 40-second loop. She had a board. She smiled, and it was not a happy smile exactly, but it was the specific smile of someone who has been playing the enemy's game and has just figured out the actual rules. The observer was flagging the data stream to her superior before the human's second minute of the final life was complete. What the human was doing was not in any assessed behavioral catalog. It was not evasion. It was not aggression. It was closer to something the Varrock did not have a word for because they had never needed one: the deliberate studied exploitation of a system's own mechanics against itself. The arena's loop was a standard design feature. It prevented subjects from attempting to escape through the walls. If exiting one side simply returned you to the other, the concept of through became meaningless. It was also used to recycle obstacles, which reduced the material cost of long assessments. In 412 species, not one had identified the loop as an exploitable mechanic within the assessment window. They encountered it as a disorienting phenomenon and either adapted to the enclosed space or did not. The human had adapted in the second life. In the third life, she was using it. She was timing the obstacle cycle, using the board not only to move but to control her position relative to the incoming obstacles, intercepting their trajectories at the point of entry from the left wall, where the speed was lowest, where the predictability was highest. She was not responding to the arena, she was running it. The observer escalated the flag. This had not happened before. The assessment was designed to have a ceiling, a point at which the subject's capability was exceeded, and the data collection was complete. The ceiling was supposed to come within 3 minutes for Tier 3 fauna. The human was approaching the 2-minute mark of her final life, with no indication that any ceiling existed. The superior reviewed the flag and responded with a single authorization code: tier escalation. Obstacles 4 and 5. Reyes felt the temperature in the arena drop about half a degree, a sensation so slight she almost dismissed it. And then the obstacles changed. They were faster. Not faster in the way that a faster runner is faster. A simple scaling of speed, but faster in a way that ate the timing margins she'd been banking on. She missed the first one, a rectangle she'd have cleared with half a second to spare under the old pattern, and had to abandon the board to avoid the follow-up. Caught herself on one knee. Came up bleeding from the elbow where she'd hit the floor. No reset. She still had the life. The arena had upgraded the difficulty without ending her run. She had approximately 90 seconds on the clock. She took a breath and picked up the board and considered. The pattern had changed but hadn't been replaced. It was the same base cycle, the same 40-second loop, but now the obstacles were faster and she tracked one as it exited the right wall, not visibly slower at exit. If they didn't slow down at the loop boundary, the window for entry point interception was gone. She'd lost her primary advantage, but she still had the loop. The loop didn't just affect obstacles. She had tested it herself in the second life, walking through it to confirm it wasn't mirrors. She walked out the right side and came in through the left. There was a half-second delay. She'd felt it, a brief discontinuity, the world stuttering. She'd cataloged it as a curiosity and moved on. Right now, staring at a faster obstacle bearing down on her with 70 seconds on the clock, she thought about that half-second delay very carefully. The obstacles looped. She could loop. The obstacles took 40 seconds to complete the circuit. She had moved through the circuit in roughly 3 seconds of walking. If she could ride the loop, not walk it, ride it, full speed, she might be able to achieve a position the obstacles had already passed through. Get behind them, not dodge them but lap them. She had one shot at testing this. If she got the angle wrong, she'd hit the right side wall on a bad approach, and the board would slip and she'd be on the floor with 30 seconds left and no margin. She set her feet. She looked at the distance to the right side opening. She looked at the obstacle moving toward her from the left. She counted 3 heartbeats. She rode. It was not a perfect run. The entry through the right side was slightly off angle, and she had to drop her left foot to correct. And for one long, terrible quarter second, the board wobbled, and she was certain she was going down. She didn't go down. She came through the left entry at a speed that felt wrong in her legs. The kind of speed that requires a slope to maintain a flat surface. And she understood dimly that the loop was doing something to momentum. That physics inside the fold did not behave in precisely the way physics outside did. She came through moving fast and aimed directly at the back of an obstacle. She jumped it from behind. She had time, now on the backside of the cycle, with the obstacles moving away from her and then looping to come back. She used that time to read the new pattern, to find the timing in the upgraded difficulty, to breathe. The clock showed 41 seconds. She made it to 22 before the arena escalated again. This time there was no temperature drop, no warning. A sound instead, a low harmonic thrum that seemed to come from all directions at once, and then the far wall of the arena darkened, the gray amber wash replaced by something redder, angrier, and the floor at the far end opened and something came out. It was not an obstacle. It was the approximate size of a human torso, a dense cluster of alien geometry, not a body, not a machine, something between the two, floating at 2 meters altitude and moving with the deliberate patience of a thing that knows it doesn't need to hurry. It had no visible eyes. It had something that functioned like attention. She could feel the attention turn toward her the way you feel a targeting laser before you see it. 22 seconds. She had been in firefights. She had been in ambushes. She had been in a burning building once in Sector 14, when the extraction was 3 minutes late, and she'd had to find her own way out through a floor that was actively collapsing. She knew what it felt like to be in a scenario designed by the universe to kill her, and she knew the single reliable truth about all those scenarios. There was always a door. Not always a good door. Not always a door you'd choose if you had options, but a door. Something in the scenario that wanted to be exploited if you were paying attention. She looked at the alien geometry drifting toward her with its terrible patient attention, and she looked at the loop opening on the right wall, and she looked at the timer showing 19 seconds, and she found the door. The loop preserved momentum. She had proven that. She'd come through faster than she went in, or at least that was what it felt like. The physics were wrong in ways she hadn't had time to fully map, but wrong in a consistent direction. The loop gave something back, more than you put in. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have anything that could damage alien geometry in 18 seconds. But she had a board, and she had a loop, and she had a ceiling. She looked at the ceiling. 14 seconds. She made a decision that would have looked, to any outside observer, completely insane. She got on the board and rode straight at the alien geometry. The observer had never transmitted an abort code before. In 11,000 assessments, across 412 species, the endpoint of a Tier 5 escalation had always been the same. The final evaluation construct, the geometry that humans would later describe inadequately as a drone, a spirit, a ghost, made contact. The assessment data was finalized and the subject was returned to the surface with appropriate neural editing. Clean. Professional. The subjects never knew they'd been assessed. They went back to their lives carrying a faint unease they couldn't explain, like the residue of a dream that won't resolve. The observer transmitted the abort code when the human rode directly at the construct. Not because she was afraid for the human. She was not afraid for the human. She was afraid for the data integrity. The human's behavior had gone so far outside the modeled range that she was no longer certain the assessment framework was capturing it accurately. The abort code did not stop what happened next. The human rode at the construct, and at the last moment, with 4 seconds on the clock and the construct's attention locked in the pattern response triggered by an approaching subject, she dropped the board. The board hit the floor at speed and bounced, and the bounce was not random. She had aimed it. She had aimed it at the right side opening, with the board flat and low and moving fast, and the board went through the loop, and it came out the left side, and when it came out moving faster than it had gone in, because the loop gave something back, and it hit the construct from behind, at a speed that was not a skating speed anymore. That was the speed of something that had been through a physics anomaly, and come out carrying a debt the universe was now collecting. The construct was not designed to absorb impact from behind. The arena had never encountered a situation in which a non-powered projectile looped through the assessment space and struck the evaluation mechanism from the rear. The construct had no posterior sensors. It did not know the board was coming. The impact made a sound like a bell that had been taught to swear. The construct dropped 3 feet and held there, flickering, its pattern response cascade interrupted, its attention, that terrible patient attention, scattered. It didn't die. It didn't break. But for 6 seconds it was not organizing. 3 seconds on the clock. Rays hit the right side opening at full speed. Through the loop, out the left side, moving fast, and she landed with her feet on the board, and her weight centered, and she rode the last 3 meters of the arena to the wall, and she hit the wall, and she put both hands on it, and she pushed herself to us, and she stood there breathing. The timer reached 0. The meter went dark. The arena folded back. She was in the alley, the wet gravel under her boots, the smell of copper and old smoke. The sky above her showing a thin, gray line of approaching dawn on the eastern edge. She stood there for a long moment, board under one arm, elbow bleeding where she'd hit the floor, left arm aching from a fracture she hadn't fully registered yet in the focused metabolism of survival. Then she took her comm unit off her belt and called for extraction. The debriefing lasted 6 hours. The debrief officer was professional and systematic and wrote down approximately 40% of what she told him, the 40% that fit into existing incident categories. He was not a bad person. He was a person operating inside a reporting structure that had not yet developed the categories for what she was describing, which meant that what she was describing existed, for administrative purposes, as a collection of anomalies rather than a coherent event. She understood this. She was patient. She answered every question twice when asked, gave every piece of physical evidence she could provide, the blood from her elbow, the fractured radius, confirmed by the medical scanner, the impact marks on her board that could not have been produced by any object she should have encountered in a pacified sector alley. And she filed it all with the calm precision of someone who knows that documentation is a long game. What she did not file, because no form existed for it, was the conclusion she had reached sometime between the arena folding back and the extraction team arriving. The assessment had been running for a long time. Longer than humanity had been in this war, she suspected. Longer than humanity had been watching the stars. Species by species, the Varrock had cataloged the ceiling of every organism they encountered, and they had calibrated their occupations accordingly, and those occupations had all eventually ended the same way. The Varrock had made a mistake, not a tactical mistake, not a mistake in execution. They had made a structural mistake, the kind of mistake that comes from having a system that works perfectly across 412 data points, and then encountering a 413th data point that the system was not designed to model. The mistake was this: they had assumed that what an organism does alone, stripped of tools and coordination and civilization, is what that organism is. They had assumed that baseline performance represents true capability, that the floor is the ceiling. For 412 species, that had been accurate. What the Varrock did not understand, could not understand, she suspected, without running the experiment they had just accidentally run, was that humans don't have a baseline in that sense. A human alone with a board and a loop and 11 seconds and a thing bearing down on her is not a human reduced to baseline. That is a human in their element. That is the organism in the precise conditions it was designed for, desperate, creative, surrounded by problems, holding one weird piece of technology it shouldn't be able to do anything meaningful with, the board. They would catalog it, add it to the observation notes, flag it as a non-standard tool adaptation, miss the point entirely. The point was not the board. The point was that she had looked at a cage built by a species that had caged 412 other forms of intelligent life. And she had found the door, and the door had been made of the cage itself. 3 weeks after the Sector 9 incident, a second assessment arena activated in Sector 12. The subject this time was Sergeant Kwame Adu, a combat engineer with a specialty in structural exploitation and a recreational habit of free-running the maintenance corridors of whatever installation he happened to be stationed at. He encountered the meter at 0217 hours while returning from a late shift. He lasted the full 3 minutes on his first life. The Varrock observer who monitored this assessment transmitted an escalation flag within 45 seconds. By the 90-second mark, she had transmitted 3 more. By the end of the first minute of the second life, She had contacted her superior with a query. The assessment framework had no formal mechanism to process. What do we do when the subject has optimized? The superior did not respond immediately. The delay was, in Varric terms, significant. It suggested genuine uncertainty at a level of the hierarchy that was not supposed to experience genuine uncertainty. The response when it came was a single administrative notation: assessment inconclusive. Data flagged for review. Data flagged for review meant we don't know what to do with this. It meant the categories are insufficient. It meant, in the flat language of a species that had run 11,000 assessments and trusted the data absolutely, something close to what a human would call being shaken. Adu came out of the alley at 0501 hours with a sprained ankle, 0 remaining evaluation constructs, and a very clear memory of exactly how the loop had functioned, which he immediately wrote down in the small waterproof notebook he carried in his left breast pocket, because he had learned in 12 years of combat engineering that the things you observe in moments of stress are the most valuable data you will ever collect, and the most likely to dissolve if you don't capture them immediately. He filed the notebook with the debrief officer. The debrief officer did not know what to do with it. He sent it up the chain. It eventually reached a signals analyst in Central Command, who had also been briefed on the Reyes incident, and who had been quietly pulling on the threads of what Sector 9 had actually meant, and who now held 2 notebooks and 2 incident reports, and a hypothesis that she had not yet dared to write in full, because it was the kind of hypothesis that, if correct, changed everything. The hypothesis was simple. The Varric thought they were hunting humans. The Varric thought they were assessing prey, but every assessment they ran was teaching a human how the arenas worked. Not one human, not gradually. Immediately, specifically, in the precise format of first-hand experience, encoded in muscle memory and written in waterproof notebooks, and filed in chains of command, that led to analysts with the training to synthesize across incident reports. The Varric were running an intelligence pipeline. They just didn't know it. The data was flowing in both directions, and they were only reading one of the streams. She wrote the hypothesis out finally at 300 hours on a Tuesday, 7 pages. Referenced both incident reports, both notebooks, the medical evidence, the impact analysis of Reyes's board, the structural exploitation notes from Adu's engineering background, applied to the loop topology. She titled it with the flattest, most administrative language she could manage, because she had learned early that the titles that get read fastest in a command structure are the ones that sound boring. Assessment Anomaly Reconciliation Study, Cross-Reference, Sectors 9 and 12. She sent it up the chain at 0347 hours. The response came back in 14 minutes, which was the fastest response she had ever received to any document she had submitted in 11 years of service. It said, confirm availability for immediate briefing, full command. The briefing lasted 9 hours. Not because the hypothesis was complicated. It was, at its core, extremely simple, but because the implications took time to process at every level of a command structure that had spent 3 years being told the occupation was unwinnable against an adversary with 412 successful occupations behind them. The arenas were not rare. Once command started looking, they found evidence of 47 arena activations in the occupied sectors over the previous 18 months. 47 incidents that had been filed as anomalies, as unexplained encounters, as subjects reporting disorientation and missing time, and returning with injuries inconsistent with documented hazards. 47 humans who had been inside an alien assessment arena. 47 humans who now knew from the inside exactly how it worked. The Varric had assessed 47 humans. They had taken what they needed and discarded the rest. They had been very careful not to kill any of the subjects, because dead subjects don't return to the population with neural edits and manageable unease. Dead subjects create investigations, and investigations create complications. They had been so careful not to kill the subjects. They had not been careful about letting the subjects remember. It took the resistance 7 months to map the network. Using the analyst's framework, incident cross-referencing, the expertise of 47 people who had been inside arenas and survived, and a remarkable amount of late-night work by Kwame Adu and his notebook, they built a complete topological map of the Varric assessment infrastructure in the occupied sectors. Every meter location, every activation pattern, the complete physics of the loop, not the intuited, experiential version that Reyes had discovered under 11 seconds of pressure, but the formal version, derived from the notes of 47 people, comparing what they'd experienced and finding the consistent mathematics underneath. The loop gave energy back. Not magically, not in violation of conservation, but because the fold was not a passive structure. It was powered. The assessment arenas were powered by the same grid that powered the Varrock occupation infrastructure throughout the sectors. 47 arenas. One grid. Dana Reyes was in the planning room when they laid it out, standing in the back with her arms crossed and her repaired elbow resting on the table edge. She's listened to the briefing officers explain the topology, the grid connections, the cascade potential if you hit the right nodes. She watched the command staff absorb the information with the slowly dawning expression of people realizing that a war they thought they were losing had been, all along, arranged in a configuration that could be won. She thought about the alley, the meter activating, the orange glow of the readout settling on 3 minutes. She thought about the board and the loop and the door that was made of the cage itself. She thought about the fact that the Varrock had run this assessment on 47 humans. And not one of those 47 was in this room because they'd failed the assessment. They were all here because they'd passed it. They were here because the Varrock had grabbed 47 of the most capable, most creative, most terminally stubborn members of an already terminally stubborn species and put them in a room designed to find their ceiling. And every single one of them had done what humans do when you find their ceiling. They'd looked for the next floor up. The plan was simple. The execution was 17 minutes. At the end of those 17 minutes, the Varrock assessment grid went dark across all 47 nodes simultaneously, and the cascade, the precise, mathematically inevitable cascade that Adu had described in his notebook and the analyst had formalized in her study, took the occupation infrastructure with it. Not all of it, enough of it. Enough that the remaining Varrock forces in the occupied sectors found themselves in the same situation their arenas had been designed to create. Isolated, stripped of coordination, reduced to their baseline capability. The Varrock's baseline capability was considerable. The humans' baseline capability, as the Varrock had been carefully documenting for 18 months, was something else entirely. Reyes was in Sector 9 when the grid went dark. She'd asked to be. It seemed right. In the way that soldiers sometimes need things to seem right when the mathematics of survival have been grinding them down for years. She was standing in the alley where it had started. The old transit hub wall, the rectangular patch where the meter had been, still faintly outlined in a scorch pattern that the cleaning sweeps hadn't fully erased. When the lights died in the Varrock infrastructure towers, she watched the scorch mark, waited. Irrationally, probably, but she waited. The scorch mark stayed dark. She thought, good. Then she picked up her board and she rode.